In step 4A, we will generate a summary of Veronica's performance by customer in the customer summary sheet. Back to you, Dr. Parra.
All right, welcome back to our spreadsheet assignment. So let me focus first on counting the number of transactions for Alabama supplies. So the normal type of function that I would have used is COUNTIF, but in this case, we have more than one type of criteria that we want to apply as our condition for counting the transactions. It's not just counting all the transactions that belong to Alabama supplies, but we're going to add an additional criterion that includes the date. In fact, we're gonna do a couple of those to define the date. All right, so if we use the COUNTIFs formula, then I can have a series of criteria to apply that range. So how does the COUNTIFs work? Number one, we wanna make sure that we return the count of a range depending on a specified criteria. The first element is that criteria range. So what am I gonna try to match against or try to filter by or condition with our criterion? Well, I'm going to try to condition number one, the name of these transactions. And those names are contained in our B column. So if I select the range transactions B1 to B1000, that should give us the range of the criteria that we want to match against the name on our cell A2. That's it. So I am only going to count those transactions in our transactions sheet that have the name Alabama Supplies, which is contained in our cell A2, anywhere from B1 to B1000. All right. Let me go ahead and anchor it so that I can be ready to copy as soon as I'm done. Another requirement that I want is to have a range of a date. So what I need to do is find out where the dates contain in my transactions table. So let's go back here, and it looks like they're on the E column. So all I have to do is select the E1. So let me go back to my customer summary, right? And keep going at this. Press the comma, go to my transactions, and select my E column. And sometimes it's a little slow, so I have to do E. I may type it manually if you find that you're stuck without advancing. Notice that I just went back and corrected that. I'm going from E1 all the way to E1000 for my criteria. And then, right, I am going to make sure that I use a quotation mark to define a condition that is not exactly as an address. So this is actually something I'm going to write, not something that is contained somewhere, right? So in this case, I'm going to say this is less than, I'm sorry, let me start with higher than or equal to 1/1/2018, right? That is my criteria for that date. So I'm looking for transactions whose name contained in the B column match the name in the A2 field. And I'm also going to look for transactions whose date contained in the E column match or are higher or equal to 1/1/2018. Now, if I keep adding transactions for 2019, 2020, then I would get those unless I add an additional criterion. And in this case, I have to go and add an additional criterion based on date. So once again, I go and select E1 all the way to E1000 as my criteria range. And I want it to be, open parentheses, less than or equal 12/31/2018. And then I close the quotation mark and close the parentheses. An additional thing that I want to do right away is also make sure that I anchor the references to those ranges so that they don't move with me. The only thing that I want to move when I copy stuff down is this A2 column. All right, so let's take a look at this once again. This is counting the number of transactions that match the name contained in the cell A2, which is the Alabama supplies. And then we want to make sure that we filter only those transactions that are higher than January 1st, 2018, and then equal to or less than 12/31/2018. When you type that in, it's going to give me 11. I can copy paste the rest, and I can see that only 19 transactions for professor and students PC happened to occur in 2018. I can always verify that by going back to my transactions list and doing a bunch of filterings. So I am going to use a different function called sumifs. I'm going to have more than one criterion, so I'm going to use the plural version of the formula, which is sumifs. And the very first parameter that it's asking for to return the sum of a range depending on multiple criteria is to provide the range that we want to, or where the numbers are sitting to be summed. So the range that contains the total revenues to be summed will be on our revenue column. So let's go back into our transactions and select the column that contains the revenue. Oh, I just made a little typo here. Let me hide this. Again, let's do a sum of ifs, starting with the transactions sheet and the revenue column, which starts on H1 all the way down to H1000. And sometimes it takes a little longer. So let me just type it in, H1000. And we are almost done. That is with the first range. The second range says, well, what is your criteria range for the first criterion? Well, the first criterion will be the customer's name. So let me go back and grab B1 to B1000 and make sure it matches the customer name contained on my cell A2, right? So that is my first criterion that will be applied. The second criterion will be very similar to the one before. I want to make sure that the transaction happened in 2018. So I will go ahead and select the range of dates that I'm gonna verify. And notice that I'm always using the same beginning point for each one of those ranges. So I'm looking at H1 to H1000. So my transaction range should also start from B1 to B1000, otherwise you're gonna get an error. And my transaction range or my range for my dates should also start on E1 and end all the way on E1000, right? And so what is the criteria that I have, or the criterion that I have for this particular range? Well, I want it to be greater than or equal to 1/1/2018, right? Close the quotation marks. And then I'm going to repeat the same criterion range to give it a maximum value. So this is going to be E1 to E1000, or I could have selected the range. I'm just the faster typist sometimes, but just be careful that you're not making errors. And notice that I was not very consistent with these, but I hope that gets corrected. And then that range will have an additional criterion of less than or equal to 12/31/2018, right? Because what if we had transactions in 2019? We want to make sure that we eliminate those as well. And I can close my sum ifs and finish it, right? And so in this case, I have the total of revenues for Alabama supplies that occurred in 2018. If I want to copy this everywhere else, I'm going to make sure that I F4 or anchor all the ranges so that when I copy paste this down across many fields, the range can keep staying from B1 to B1000. The dates would stay from E1 to E1000 and so forth. And so that is indeed the case. If this is not the right format, make sure that you go to the format and change the number to financial, right? So let's go straight to requirement number 4C, which is the total cost of goods sold. Basically what I'm doing is I am just adding up the same, a different column. So the only thing I have to change from the total revenue to the total cost of goods sold would be a different sum range, but every criterion stays the same. So all of my criteria will stay the same. The only thing that will change is the sum range, because I don't want to sum column H anymore. It's column H contains my revenue. All I want is to add column I. So I could redo the whole transaction. I'm a little lazy sometimes, so what I'll do is I'll just copy the entire content of this, right? Because that eliminates the possibility of me making a mistake unless I made a mistake from the beginning, right? So I'm gonna sum this, and I am gonna change the sum range. Instead of H1, I'm gonna make it I1 to I1000. So in essence, I'm asking Google Sheets to sum those figures on column I1 to I1000, right, that have met the following criteria. The name matches whatever's in this cell, and the dates match above this date or below that date. And that's it. That's all I'm doing. And in essence, I am getting that sum if, and I do not need to anchor anything else because everything is already done. So I just copy paste the rest, and within 10 seconds, I am done with requirement for C. All right, let's keep going. Let's do the total profit margin. Sorry, I'm so dorky, but it's just the way it is. In this requirement, we want to make sure that we match the total profit margin. We could do it two ways. We can just say, well, the revenue minus cost of goods sold should be my total profit margin in this case. That's the easiest way to do it. Or I can just do another sum if. So why don't we just do it the long way, because it will pay off in the end. Let's find out where the operating margin is sitting at, which is on J, column number J. So let's just copy paste my criteria from the same cell that is adding the cost of goods sold. And let's go ahead and move it over to the total profit margin. And instead of adding my values on the range of I1 to I1000, I'm going to switch that to J, which contains my profit margins for each transaction. And I'm going to keep the same criteria, right? The name on the transactions in the range of B1 to B1000 matches the contents of A2, and the dates are the same. So let's go ahead and keep it and just copy paste it all the way down, and voila, we are done with the sum of our profit margins for each one of our customers. The next requirement is to provide the transaction with the smallest profit margin for each one of these customers in 2018. So we've used the function minimum in the past, right? The min function finds the minimum value in a range. We're doing the same thing here, but we're going to add a set of criteria to eliminate everything else that does not match those transactions. So we're filtering out a set of transactions and then finding the minimum amount within those transactions. So I'm going to use the min ifs because we're going to add more than one criteria. I really want to just grab the rest. I mean, the range would be, where is my profit margin range? Well, it is sitting on our transactions table, right? Right here from J1 to J1000. The next is the criteria range. Well, I'm going to, once again, grab the name from B1 all the way to B1000, and I wanted to match my customer summary. Let me hide all this stuff. I wanted to match the customer name in our customer summary sheet, right? And then I have to go back to my transactions date and grab the column of E, right? Because we're going to use E1 to E1000. And I'm going to use the same criteria. We're going to say this has to be greater than or equal to 1/1/2018. Close the parentheses. Then I'm going to grab the same range again to apply an additional criteria criterion that says I want all of those dates to be less than or equal to 12/31/2018. Close the function. So let me make sure that I'm doing this right. I'm looking at transactions J1, right? And looking for the minimum value in that range where the transaction record matches the value in our cell A2, which happens to have the name of the customer, right? And the B1 to B1000 is the column where the customers are. And then the dates are the same. Transaction dates are greater than January 2018 and less than or equal to December 31, 2018. I meant to say greater than or equal to January 1st, 2018. All right. We can just enter it, and that should be it. Now, alternatively, what I could have done is said, hey, I am really looking at the same criteria and the same column from the left. Right? The J contains my profit margin. So couldn't I just copy paste this here? And say instead of sum if I do ifs. So I'm finding the minimum value in this range with the same criteria as the left. I just want to make sure I'm not making a mistake. So why don't I just keep copying and pasting? But I wanted to show the long way and the easy way. Copy paste everything else. Everything's anchored. I don't have to worry about the anchors anymore. I'm going to stop the video. All right, let's get back to work. Let's work on the average profit margin. So we're going to find the transaction for each customer, the average, profit margin in 2018 for every one of those customers. So what function do you think you can use? There's one that's called average, right? And there's one that is average ifs, meaning that we're going to have a bunch of criteria that will be applied. And guess what? The criteria is not changing from the smallest profit margin. So couldn't I just go grab the entire set of, I'm not copy pasting. I'm going in by pressing F2, by the way, and then I'm Control A or selecting all the text. And then I'm going to paste it here. If you try to copy paste into an additional cell, guess what's going to happen? It's going to move your A2 reference to B2, right? And we don't want to do that. So if you had that error, that's what's going on there, all right? So instead of using the min transaction, then I want to use the average ifs. I'm going to look at the average of the J column, which happens to have your profit margins. I want to make sure that I'm matching the name for each one of those fields and then the dates. If I copy paste this down, same thing, right? Look at this. Average of J1 to J1000, making sure that the name matches the name contained on A30. Everything else is the same. So the only thing that's changing is the formula that we use and the name that we are matching to. And in this case, since this spreadsheet is using the same criteria, the three are going to be the same. This is just going to be a min if. This is going to be an average if. And guess what's going to happen on our largest? All right, let's go ahead and do the next one. Thank you very much. We are now going to use the max formula with if statements that are exactly the same as our criteria on the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the contents of the cell, select all the text so I don't make a mistake, Control copy. In this case, it just happens to be, we're lucky that we're using the same criteria. So I'm just going to copy everything, paste everything, and within the average, I didn't copy a cell to another cell. I just copied the context or the actual text within the cell. And instead of having average, we're going to look for the max if, which gives me the maximum value in a range of cells filtered by a set of multiple criteria. Where is my range? The range is still the J column and my criteria stays the same. What a beauty. This is just a bunch of copying and pasting, and we are done.